Hello guys, and welcome to the first in a several-part series on a guide to D&D world building. This series will help introduce ideas and expand on how you can create adventure and possibly even books or video games. So this first video will be discussing about gods and their influence on culture and how culture can also influence your decision making with your gods. And I will be expanding on the aspects to consider when designing your Pantheon of Gods for your world. So firstly, when considering your Pantheon of Gods, you need to think of maybe what your inspiration is, whether it could be Greek, Norse, Egyptian, or if you're creating your very own homebrew Pantheon of Gods, maybe inspired by previous D&D pantheons like the Greyhawk setting that is shown within the Dungeon Master's Guide. Gods can have a strong influence on the culture of a world, or maybe just a specific kingdom. You may have different kingdoms that worship different types of gods or worship the same series of gods in different ways. So one of the things to consider, for example, is when I was creating a campaign, it was set in a fantasy feudal Japan. So I had the Pantheon reflect that culture by being a representation of a royal dynasty, with the head of the Pantheon being the emperor. Typically, when breaking down your Pantheon, you need to think of the core domains and aspects that you want covered. Typically, these aspects will be found throughout all types of cultures and societies, as they are pillars that make up civilization. For example, you will probably have a god that represents the arts and craftsmanship within that society, whether it could be music, dance, it could be of more normal types of craftsmanship such as blacksmithing or woodworking. Other domains to consider could be that of farming and hunting, if that is a strong connection for your people in this world. Weather and nature are core elements of nearly all fantasy worlds, so that is another consideration of do your people worship the turning of tides within the seasons, or the aspects of wildlife and animals. Two common gods within a pantheon will be that of law and that of knowledge. Usually they have a link with law being connected to that of war and battle, and knowledge being a link to that of magic. This is not always the case. You may divide these domains into even more gods and create a larger pantheon, or subvert this idea and create a god of magical warfare and a god of law within the aspect of understanding it. When designing your gods, try and consider their deep aspects for how those who worship them, how do they see these gods? Do they see them as individuals, or do they see them as kind of concepts? Another thing to think about is the idea of possibly evil gods, a kind of reverse pantheon perhaps, or these could be aspects of gods within one larger, greater pantheon. For instance, you may have a god of knowledge, so therefore there will probably be a god of secrets, and possibly also contains that of lies. Another evil god you might consider is that of thievery and murder, the type that criminals might worship. These evil gods could be maybe outlawed within your kingdom, or maybe they are banished by the other gods, and maybe secret cults still worship them, creating great plot hooks and quest lines for you to design for your world. When expanding upon each god, try and consider the way it's represented. Think about maybe the domains that it possesses, and consider how those domains may have links to other things, such as a god of agriculture will probably have strong ties to the sun, and maybe that is a way that he is represented, or maybe he has a tie to a god that represents the light. Another example would be is typically a god with the tempest domain will likely be tied to the sea, as the weather has a strong effect on sailors sailing across the ocean. When deciding how your gods influence the culture of your world, you can do this either way. You can have a predetermined idea of the kind of world you have and decide that is how it's reflected within your gods, or vice versa. You can design your gods first and decide how they have influenced how the people act. For instance, if there is a god of nobility, maybe his presence influences people in society to live honorably and strive for nobility. Going back on the previous consideration of a god being represented as an ideal, you may represent that god in less of a character sense and more of a concept. For instance, in the game World of Warcraft, they have the worship of the light, this embodiment of holiness with not really a core figure at its head. As an example of how I've used these points and suggestions to create my own Pantheon of Gods, I've designed a small pantheon of 4 figures for a world setting I am creating. This Pantheon of Gods is specific to a series of golem race individuals, and although this pantheon is rather small, I typically would do around 6 to 8 figures. This pantheon is small because it is influenced by the culture of the golems. Therefore, these gods act as the main pillars to these people's society and give them one of their pathways through life. The first god, for example, is known as the Father of the Sword and is represented as the embodiment of a perfect soldier. He acts as a father figure, as an idea of someone who raises up strong and noble warriors. He is represented in society as a figurehead to the organization known as the House of War. The Mother of Magic is known as the original Magi and the inventor of current day magic teachings. All Magi try to follow in her footsteps, as she is the figurehead to their house, the House of Arcanum. The other deity, the Hammer of God, is considered, rather than a person, is more of an artifact, the perfect crafted item. All Golemkin craftsmen try to reach this idea of creating an item equal to quality of this artifact. However, it is seen as godly and unable to be accomplished by mortals. That is the reason that this god is known as the figurehead for their house, the House of the Anvil. The head of the pantheon is known as the Golem Hero and is a depiction of a hero who saved the golem in the past, deep within their history. He is used as the figurehead for the royal family. These 4 gods make the pantheon for the golems and help represent a good understanding of their society and culture. Now, this is just an example of how I used the points I made to create a series of gods for my own world setting. You can find more resources online that can help expand and help with these ideas, as well as using pre-existing gods and reskinning them for yourself. I hope this video will be a helpful resource for the DMs out there who are looking to create their own homebrew world, or at least start trying to design a fantasy setting for themselves. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a like, and there'll be more of this series to help with more aspects for your world building setting. Currently right now my channel has no sponsors, so here I'm going to put a shameless plug to my own DM skilled resources that I've posted online. They are pay as you want, so you can grab them for free, but if you'd like these resources and find them handy for your own D&D settings, then please feel free to throw me a few quid. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.